Let us go straight to this very interesting conversation about the Nigeria's debt market. That is one market has seen new oceans in recent years. And now all the big names are coming together next week for a conference that will take a very good look at the industry. Kemi Awodein, he is the managing director in charge of investment banking at Chapel Hill Denham Advisory. That's a financial services group, one of the biggest on Broad Street, and that's not an advertorial. Kemi, it's good to have you here.
Hello, how are you?
Thank you. Good. When we talk about the debt market in Nigeria, yes, what are the key issues here for those of you who are investment banks and financial services companies, as well as other operators?
Okay, I think we recognize that the potential for growth in that market is huge. What we see currently is mainly a few corporates and Lagos State especially using the debt capital market to raise funding for various projects. We've worked on two in building services, and Lagos State is a continuous user of debt in the capital market. I think the constraints that people who want to come to market would probably be talking about is the fact that the process can be quite unwielding, and you therefore see industrials going for term loans at the banks rather than the longer-term facilities that's available in the debt capital market. So I think that's one of the challenges. Sometimes on the investor side, maybe not understanding the company, and so therefore the interest not being there.
The debt sounds very like what most people don't like. Whether it's at the federal level or subnational or corporate.
I think people have a misunderstanding.
Do we
of
just
what,
have a phobia that we're borrowing to?
I think people have a misunderstanding of what debt is, and people say, for example, that Lagos State borrows too much, or does a corporate need that financing from the debt capital market? And I would say yes, because the orbit is vast. We have pension funds, that are gathering, every month, and that money must be put to work somewhere. Most of the money is going into short-term investments in treasury bills, for example, some long-term with the federal government bonds. But there's capacity for it to go elsewhere. So if corporates and state governments, who have the ability and meet all the requirements are able to borrow, then that phobia hopefully will begin to erode and ease away. There isn't too much debt. People talk about our infrastructure development. People talk about things that corporates want to do. So a corporate wants to expand, build a new factory, build a new line for a product, and they have good cash flows. You can see what their revenue lines are, for example. But if they go for a banking loan, that banking loan is a lot more expensive for them because of the shorter tenor. So they can take that tenor out to 5 years, 7 years, 10 years, which Lagos State has done, the first subnational to do that. And it then becomes cheaper for them to borrow from the debt capital market.
So what would you like to focus on as an investment banker in the debt market?
We would like to focus on bringing more companies to the market. We get inquiries a number of times. On the issuer side, we find that there's a bit of apathy because the process can be quite long and it can be quite unwielding. People would therefore rather sometimes go for the banks where that process is a lot shorter and not as formal as going through a regulatory process with debt issuance, for example. So we would like to see a lot more corporates coming to market because there are many good stories in the market. So just trying to convince those issuers to be brave enough to take that step.
But we all know that the debt market is a lot more tedious, but there's a lot more confidence around it, isn't it?
Confidence is building. So, I think if we look back historically, we'll find out that, from when debt issuance was beginning to be formalized by the DMO, and, we then had the yield curve being evolved and everything. So, there's all that has been a good foundation. In terms of whether or not, the regulatory environment would support it, I think the regulatory environment does support it. And, they're continuing innovations to make it a little easier. So some people may not want to go through the whole SEC process, which can take anything, between maybe a three-month period to a bit longer. don't want to go through the ratings process, don't want to, so there's a lot to be done in terms of debt issuance. On the FMDQ platform, there's been innovation. So there's a shorter process, and you can do a short-term bond. So, there are ways in which issuers can come and dip their toes into those waters, and then when the confidence from the market is building up and from the issuer understanding that process, you can then go for longer tenured bonds.
You think the coming of FMDQ on board, FMDQ is Securities Exchange, the process is a lot easier, better and easier for you, for those of you who bring this issuance to the market. What about the costs that are involved and things like that? What about the yield and those who want to come? What about the environment, interest rate, inflation, currency risk?
Okay, so all of those things impact an issuance, and I'll start with the first thing you mentioned, which was FMDQ. So FMDQ has created a platform that provides, some transparency in trades and some liquidity for investors, so people don't have to think that, they have to hold to term. In terms of the process, on the FMDQ side, so there's a window for shorter tenured bonds, and so that's a way. So you can do a 2-year, a 3-year, and begin to understand that process, which becomes a lot more formal when you come to the mid or longer tenured bond, because that then becomes a Securities and Exchange Commission process. Then there's the ratings, which some people don't understand how important that process is, because if you don't get the right rating, then you can't, your credit isn't as attractive to the investors. You talk about the rates environment. Your issuer is competing with the federal government, so there's that challenge there as well. Your issuer, also has to meet the expectations of the investor. So the investor wants, X above federal government. So there's just a constant dialogue that has to be had between the issuers, the regulators, and the investors. But there definitely is that capacity in the debt capital markets.